Welcome to On the Bubble podcast episode 44. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Weda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're going to be doing our last episode of our Monarch review, and we're going to be talking about Levia and how to play her, what cards are good, and everything about her. Before we do that, do you have anything new that happened this week for you?
Not really. I've been just watching a lot of coverage. We've had two back-to-back weekends of Battle Hardens, both won by Rhea Adams on a Arcane Icelander deck, which is pretty cool to see. So congrats to her. That's a huge accomplishment. And then, it's been just cool watching the coverage and sort of seeing where everybody's at with CC. Metagame seems pretty open, pretty interesting. I'm very excited for at the time of recording, Birmingham's coming up in, I don't know, 4 days or so. So it's going to be interesting to see because we are kind of like gearing up for Nats, and it's sort of, right around the corner, that big CC season. So it's really interesting to see kind of, Levia making splashes and all of that. But in terms of like Flesh and Blood, I haven't actually been playing that much.
I've been getting pretty swamped with school and just other things. I'm getting behind on like editing this pod and everything like that, but I haven't watched or played any Flesh and Blood in the last like 2 weeks or so. What's the deck that won? You said it was Arcane Icelander. Do you have any information on it?
It's Arcane Icelander. We have the deck list. I think basically like looking to use Encase and what's the new card? Warmonger's Diplomacy, where your opponent has to choose, each player has to choose War or Peace. If you play War, you can only attack with attack actions and activate your weapon attacks. And if you choose Peace, you can only play non-attacks or activate non-attack actions. So notably, this is really good against Lexi because it prevents Lexi from flipping cards face up to get her arsenal. So you can potentially like pretty much blank her turn. If she has like a Codex face down, she just can't really do anything with it because if she plays it, she can't play the attack. If she has an arrow face down in arsenal, then I guess she can like shoot it and snaps it, but like it's pretty costly. And then Encase kind of does a very similar thing. Encase disables the hero ability as well as the equipment. So again, if you have a card face down, Encase will just kind of blank your turn for the most part. And that seems to be the main innovation from that deck, and also just like people not bringing Arcane Barrier. So turns out when you make it so your opponent can't play the game and they don't have Arcane Barrier, it is pretty good. But I mean, also like Icelander has been a good deck for a long time, and the big problem was the Lexi matchup. So, when you can shore up the Lexi matchup, Icelander being pretty good again makes a lot of sense.
Doesn't Warmonger's Diplomacy block for 3 as well?
Yeah, 0 cost, blue, block 3, that costs something like, I think it's up to like about like $30 US now. So exciting.
That's kind of gross. I haven't tried to buy anything from Dusk Till Dawn yet, so I'm gonna have to pay all these inflated prices for Calling Vegas.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of the breakout card. A lot of decks are fitting it in. Basically, any deck that is playing like pretty much entirely non-attacks or entirely attacks can slot this into their blue base pretty comfortably.
And it's just like a Lexi Hoser, and against any deck that plays this is just like Lexi Hoser, right? Like,
Yeah, it would also hose like Viscerai really bad. Like I think a lot of people are expecting Viscerai to be good, and when you have to choose only non-attack actions or only attack actions, like Viscerai is a pretty bad deck.
that's kind of interesting. I don't know what to do. Maybe I just need to start trying to pick these up. Maybe hopefully the vendors at Calling Vegas has them. Not excited to see the price points on them at that point though.
Yeah, it seems to be a popular card. I was kind of hoping it might come down in price, but it doesn't seem very likely right now.
Okay, let's move on to our main topic, which is going to be Levia. Do you want to explain Levia's main gameplay first?
Yeah, so most Levia games can kind of be like broken up into two phases, and it kind of like how much time you spend in each of them can kind of vary, but often you spend a little bit of time building up your graveyard and kind of preserving your life, and maybe swinging like, I don't know, just some big dumb brute card, or swinging your meat axe or something like that, and stocking up your graveyard. The second part of your gameplay is you are then using that graveyard and banishing cards from it, and most of your Shadow Brute cards have Blood Debt, and have this text where if you when you play them, you banish as an additional cost, you banish 3 random cards from your discard, and some of them will give you like bonus effects if you do so. Some of them that's just an additional cost, and all of that will trigger Levia's ability to turn off your Blood Debt so long as you banish a 6. So the key thing here is once you start banishing Blood Debt, you kind of have to keep banishing it or you're going to start taking damage. So you're really kind of like switching into like your aggressive mode once you start banishing your Blood Debt, and it's sort of like you can no longer sit back and just block. You have to keep pressuring. But the advantage you get is that most of these Shadow Brute cards are above rate and sort of reward you for taking on this risk with Blood Debt. But dying to your Blood Debt is something that is very real and is something that can happen to Levia. We kind of touched on this in Chain as well, and I think it applies to Levia here. But how do you win the game is a question you need to be asking yourself both as you're drafting and as you're playing. There's kind of 2 avenues that Levia has to win the game, and that is either with Dominate. She has several sources of Dominate with big attacks that can close out a game, or with Go Wide, so ways to get multiple action points. This is kind of limited, and so you do have to kind of look out for these cards that do have Go Again. But you basically want these ways to close out the game, and you can use a combination. You can do some Go Wide and then finish them off with Dominate, or you can use Dominate to soften them up and then have a really big Go Wide turn. But you do need some combination of these effects, or you can just kind of get stuck presenting like efficient damage, but just doing a lot of like 6s and 9s, and eventually you might just run into problems with your graveyard and hit your Blood Debt, or like it doesn't really win the game, even though it's efficient.
Yeah, like you can fall into the problem of like, oh, they block for 9 every turn, and then you get the one turn where you don't banish a 6 with your banish effects, and then you take like 7 or 8 Blood Dead, and you go from like 11 to 3. They attack you 3 times, you have to block 3 times. Now you can't banish again, you lose the game because you have still Blood Dead, 6, 7.
Yeah. And so if you ever find yourself on the back foot against Levia, just keep blocking and try and stay in the game as long as you can, because she can just kind of lose to herself. And ideally, like as you're playing, you're trying to manage your graveyard and everything so that this is not happening. But there is a decent amount of variance there, and no matter how good the Levia is, there is always some chance of that. So you kind of always have an out to Levia, no matter how far behind you are, because they can just randomly miss and then take a whole bunch of Blood Dead and die.
So how can we prevent that from happening? What kind of like cards are you looking for in your deck to prevent this?
To prevent
The Blood
like
Dead from killing yourself.
Yeah, so usually just cards that will most of the Shadow Brute cards will have a way to banish. For example, we could look at Hungering Slaughter Beast, which at red is a 2 for 7 that blocks 3. As additional cost, you banish 3 random cards, and it has Blood Debt. So basically, so long as you banish a 6 power attack off of this, Levi's ability will then turn off Blood Debt for the turn, and you're good to go. And that 2 cost 7 power attack is, a little bit above rate. You'd normally expect like a 2 for 6, but you get a 2 for 7 for your trouble. It's kind of like how the class is set up.
And I guess most of Levi's card block for 3, right? All the Shadow Brute cards I think block for 3, is that right?
Well, they all block for 3 or block for 0.
Okay. Yeah,
she
let's
does have a number of no blocks. But yes, in general, her cards that block very well.
let's talk about I guess the deck outline next. How many 6 powers are you looking for in your deck?
I think you want to have at least half your deck 6 powers usually. So like 15-ish 6 powers is probably like about the minimum. And then ideally I'd like to have more, like maybe like 2/3 of your deck being 6 powers, 20. So in that 15 to 20 range, closer to the 20 range is going to be a little more consistent. Closer to the 15 range, you're more likely to run into problems with not banishing a 6 when you really need to.
Would you ever consider playing more than 20?
Maybe. I think so, like, yes, Possibly, but the biggest thing is you still need enough of these ways to win the game. So like enough access to dominate and go wide and all of that to actually close out the game. So I guess if you had just like infinite dread screamers, then you could just kind of do that. But more realistically, like you probably need some of the non-attack actions because a lot of them, like the non-attacks that buff up your attacks are ways that you can use your hand, because brute kind of inherently is like a little bit action point starved, and so you really do want some ways to convert your hand, and usually that means including some non-attacks. But yeah, I suppose you could have more than 20. It's not like 20 is like a hard stop, but make sure that you aren't just including 6 powers and no ways to actually like go over the top.
Yeah, as long as you have a way to win the game, then all the other cards can be 6 powers or more, right?
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
And we talked a little bit about the no blocks just now. Would you play any of the no blocks?
So I think that the no blocks are generally okay to play. The blue Dreadwood Rumblers are decent as a blue that attacks for 6 and is a 6 power to turn on things like your Zealous Beltings if you have them. And similarly, Smash with Big Tree is a fairly reasonable red threat, coming in as a 2 for 7. But I think you really don't want too many of these cards because especially if you're in that early game phase where you're trying to build up your graveyard and preserve your life total, if you end up just having a hand with a bunch of no blocks, you don't get to fill your graveyard. You can't convert. You can't even use multiples of these, and it's just it's really really bad. So like I feel like I'm comfortable with having like at most 4 no blocks. I'd probably prefer it to be more like three or less. But yeah, I think playing a few of them is okay.
Would you so for example, like Smash with the Big Tree Blue is a 5 power, obviously a blue strip, no block. Would you ever consider playing something like this?
I would sure hope not to. It's pretty terrible. Like I think really the ones that I mentioned are the main ones I would consider. Red Smash or red Dreadwood's Rumbler are fine, and blue Dreadwood Rumbler is also fine. But I wouldn't want too many copies of these no blocks in total.
Yeah, that's fair. And I guess one good card would be Pulping. Pulping also blocks for is a no block. But this is a
Mhm.
rare. This one in particular actually goes into like your trying to go wide plan, so it's kind of necessary. The more poppings you have, the less like Smash with Big Trees you can play, right?
Smash with Big Tree very much feels like a card that you can put into your deck and it's fine, but it's not like, oh, I got to get to my like 3 no blocks so that I have those premium Smash with Big Trees. Like it really doesn't feel like that. Like I think if I could just have a good Levia deck that didn't have any no blocks, I would probably play that, but realistically you probably play a couple of them, and as long as they're the right pitches, it's okay. You're fine with it.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, they are still kind of powerful. Like they hit the hardest in the format, so you probably just like maybe still just want one copy of like Red Redwood Rumbler anyways. Just so then you can like combine it with like the dominate effects to give it dominate and stuff like that.
For sure. And maybe something important to note about this is that null block and zero block aren't the same thing. If it has null block, you cannot commit it as a card on the combat chain that's defending. So even though they have 6 power, they are not actually poppers because you can't defend with them. So just kind of a side note.
I think this will be a good segue to just talk about the key cards in Levia. Like, which cards are we looking for in Levia, or what are the premium cards for Levia? Let's start with the commons first.
So I think the big thing about Levia is that you're really looking at how do you convert your large hands, because you can kind of get stuck just like throwing, like we talked about, throwing like 6 to 9 damage, and that's kind of it. And while that's fantastic and what you're doing in the early game a lot of the time, it doesn't actually win you the game. So probably the 2 most important cards in the deck are Who's of the Shadow Beast. This is the brute equipment that blocks for 1. And then when you banish a 6, you can banish Who's of the Shadow Beast and get an action point. This lets you get an action point on demand when you want to and have a turn where you present 2 to 3 attacks. And that is super, super big. Who's is probably the most important card in the deck. And then in a similar vein, Dread Screamer, which is a 2 for 6 that blocks 3, and as an additional cost, you banish 3 cards. And if you banish a 6 power, it gets go again. So Dread Screamer, especially at red, because it's a 6 power itself, but the yellow is also okay as a 5 power. But again, just as a way to go wide and leverage these big hands, I think Hooves and Dread Screamer are kind of like the most important cards and the biggest reasons to be Levia. And as like a short heuristic, if you can kind of judge how good a Levia deck is by does it have Hooves and how many Dread Screamers does it have? That's like a little bit reductive, but it's actually not that far off. I do think that those two cards are like head and shoulders above most of the other ones.
Yeah, especially the red one, right?
Yeah, especially the red one.
What about the yellow or the blue copies of Dread Screamer? Would you count those ones as well?
Yeah, they're decent. The yellow is pretty solid. The blue one is like getting to be not great, but it is still a reasonable blue since it does block 3 as well and can give you some go wide in the end game. But you're really like not able to push that much damage with a blue Dread Screamer because they can just, put a 3 block in front of it, leak 1, and then if you come in for like 6 or 7 after that, like you're not really going that far above what they can block. So blue's fine, but it's really the red and then to some degree the yellow that you're looking for. Maybe the last common that you want in Levia is Unworldly Bellow. This is a one cost non-attack action that blocks 3. As an additional cost, you banish 3 cards from your discard, and your next brute action gets +4 at red. Notably, it doesn't actually have to banish a 6 power to give the power buff, which is really nice, and it fits in really well with your 2 cost attacks. So this is another way to kind of sort of get go again. Like it doesn't give go again to your attack, but it adds on damage to your attack and lets you kind of once again use your use all the cards in your hand or use multiple cards in your hand, which is kind of what you're looking for, and it's a nice way to do that.
I think one note with this card is it says exactly attack action card, so it doesn't actually work with your weapon. So you can't just go pitch a blue, play bellow, attack with weapon. That doesn't actually buff the weapon. You can do that line just to banish a 6 to turn off Blood Debt, but it doesn't actually buff the weapon. So that's I've seen like some people like think that it does, and it is that is a big mistake.
Yeah, it definitely does not do that. But if you do this into like a 7 power and you have a 3 card 11, that is pretty good.
Yeah, that's kind of strong.
Onto the rares.
Yeah, onto the rares. Yeah, we already talked about pulping. Pulping is like a card that is a no block, but like the red one just goes for 6 dominate, go again essentially, and then you can like swing any other card, and it's actually just like a strong turn. Any other cards in rare that you're wanting to have in your deck?
Yeah, so Howl from Beyond is a big one. This is just the 2 cost, 2 block. Your next attack gets +3. And it's a shadow card that you can play from Banish. This is really nice in Chain, we mentioned, because you can banish it, but it's also really, really nice in Levia because as you are doing your banish 3 cards, if you banish a Howl from Beyond, you can then play it, and then it goes back to your discard, and you can kind of keep recurring it. So it's a lot of, not only is it a way to leverage big hands, but it's one that is recursive and kind of keeps coming back as you are trying to just do what you're normally trying to do, which is banish cards from your graveyard. So Howl is like a very, very strong engine piece, and having like, I think like 1 copy of Howl is pretty big for your deck, specifically at red.
Yeah, the first red howl is like kind of insane because it like enables the most it enables like the most consistent like 3 card nines, and like, or if you have like a way to give go again, like 4 card 15s kind of things.
If you have Howl and you can keep recurring it, you are starting to get into the realm of like being able to, so long as you don't die to your blood debt, you can potentially fatigue your opponent through damage just by like constantly looping back this 3 power thing that doesn't actually take a card out of your deck. So normally Levia kind of like has a little trouble fatiguing because like your meat axe requires you to draw and discard, so you do kind of end up decking yourself with your weapon, and so it's a little bit tricky. But Howl can, I don't think it's like your primary game plan, but it can be a kind of like a backup win con. And then maybe the last 2 rares that I'm really kind of looking for are ones that give you dominate. So Writhing Beast Hulk, if you banish 6 powers, it gets dominate, and it's just a 2 for 6. If you can pump this up, especially like say with an Unworldly Bellow and do a 10 dominate, that's a really good way to close the game. And similarly, Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, I think really in any pitch is pretty nice, having just like 1 to 2 copies of this card. It's a blue block 3 non-attack. It costs, how much does it cost? Does it cost 1?
It costs 2.
Costs 2. It costs 2. And it says, as an additional cost, you banish 3 random cards. And if a 6 or more power attack was banished this way, the next attack action card you play this turn gets +3 and dominate. So you do have to banish the 6 to be able to get the effect from it. But giving the +3 and dominate to it in attack, again, is just a really good way. It's not that hard to make like a 10 dominate with this card, and that's a really good way to close out the game. And the blues and the yellows are still like pretty reasonable, as like the blue is like a resource card that is also a win condition, and you can potentially pitch stack it. So I think like really any color of Convulsions is pretty nice to have.
Same note as the bellow. This card also can only buff attack actions, so just make sure you play an attack action with it and not your weapon.
Yeah, good point. And in terms of like how many of these cards that kind of let you win the game do you need? I would say kind of like if I have like hooves, 2 red dread screamer, 2 yellow dread screamer, a couple unworldly bellows, and like maybe like 2 sources of dominate, I'm feeling pretty good about my deck's ability to close the game. I think that's like quite a strong Levia deck. And then, as you get lower down, your deck gets worse. But I think that like something like that is like obtainable in draft and quite strong. So just to kind of give you an idea of like how much of this effect you need, you don't need a ton of it, but you do need multiple ways to get go again and multiple ways to maybe at least ideally at least one way to get dominate, like one to 2 ways to get dominate. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, and I think the big portion or the big part about how good this deck is you can't really have too many of these cards because if you have too many, you can just block with it. They almost all block for 3, and they are still 6 power, so you can like banish each other for the benefits of for Levia's like turning off Blood Debt, or like for Convulsion's case, like to get the dominate. So it's like a deck with like 5 red Dread Screamers, like does seem like too many, but you don't actually have to play them all. You can just like block for 3 with like 1 or 2 of the red Dread Screamers. Just make sure you don't block with all 5 of it. Like if you have excess copies of them, you can just they always just block for 3. So that's like a good part about this deck.
And maybe the last thing we should mention is like we talked about how good Hooves is. I think you're ideally looking for it to push like a 15 plus damage turn though. Like I think most ideally you want to be able to go like Dread Screamer into 2 more attacks, like Dread Screamer, Graveling, for example, and then you're pushing like I don't know, like 18 damage or something, and they just can't block at all. Like you're really looking for that big turn. In a pinch, you can do like I don't know, like a Hungering Slaughter piece into Graveling for like 7 and 7, and that's like pretty good. But if you're worried about getting fatigued, like you're really trying to aim for that 3 attack turn for Hooves. So it does kind of depend like how the game's playing and how much your opponent's blocking. But if they are just sitting back, you really need to make sure that you're setting up that Hooves to have like a really big go wide turn that you can then like maybe use a dominate turn to finish off, or vice versa. The order that they come in doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I kind of like for the hooves. I kind of like playing a Void Wraith from like a banish if you can find one.
Mm-hmm.
Typically the red one, like just like the first copy of Void Wraith. Void Wraith just reads you may played Void Wraith from your banish zone, and it's a 2 cost off. The red one is a 2 cost that attacks for 5, but it still blocks for 3. So like you can just put it in your deck as a block 3. It doesn't really count towards your 6 power, but if you have a hooves, like the 1 copy of the red Void Wraith is pretty powerful. So is like Ghostly Visit. Like the first copy of Ghostly Visit is kind of nice to have just in your deck as like a way to convert your resources if you can somehow generate extra action points.
Yeah, that's a good point because sometimes stringing together the 3 attacks off the hooves can be a little bit tricky because like Dread Screamer already costs 2 and a lot of your brute attacks are expensive. So yeah, having the extra card in your banish that doesn't even have to be in your hand is a really nice way to kind of fuel that. So that's a great point.
You want to move on to equipment. I think we already talked about how good Hooves is and how important it is to make sure you have it to make this deck functional. Any other equipment that we're looking for the deck?
Ebonfold is quite nice. just as a way to, it's a reliable way to turn off blood debt because you can pay one, banish a 6 from your hand, draw another card, and you've turned off blood debt for the turn. So that's really nice. It also kind of lets you like filter your hand and fix if you need to, and it's not really like as much of a value piece as it is in chain, unless you have like, I guess if you have these like Howl from Beyonds and Void Wraiths and stuff, then you can use it as a value piece, but otherwise it's mostly just like a consistency tool for, hey, I missed my blood debt, well, I can spend a resource and at least not completely lose the game. It's not really like what you're hoping to do, but it's nice insurance, and it does have spell void too, which is relevant into chain. We kind of talked about that in the chain episode.
It's nice to have the insurance just in case. Like you still only draw 4 cards a turn, and if you just don't have a way to banish, like you're gonna lose if there's like 5 or 6 blood dead in your banish. So if you have an ebb and fold, like you can literally turn a game where it was like unwinnable if you didn't have it to like a game where it might not even be close. Like you might they might be like desperate for you to miss the blood on your like banish, and if you just have an ebb and fold, like they don't even have that out anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely had games where I'm just sitting there and blocking and being like, maybe they miss. I'm way down on life and I have to block out every turn and I have like 5 cards in deck and they have way more than me. So there's no way I'm ever winning this game unless they miss. And sometimes you get there. But yeah, if you have up and fold, it just says, well, no, not really. Or it's much harder for you to just brick yourself.
Yeah, very hard if your deck is built properly.
After that, Blood Drop Brigade, surprise, it's pretty good in Levia as well. It kind of helps with your Dread Screamer turns, where Dread Screamer costs 2 and a lot of your brute stuff costs 2, so you can Dread Screamer into something. And again, if you're trying to set up that triple attack turn with hooves and Dread Screamer, yeah, the extra resource can just be what you need to go over the top. So yeah, Blood Drop's a pretty good pick just in general, and not too surprising here, I think.
Talking about Blood Drop Brocade is pretty good in basically all the heroes, right? Like I think every
Yeah,
single time we talked about in the hero episodes, we talked about Blood Drop Brocade. Probably one of the best equipment in the set at common.
yeah, I think so. And it's like, I'm not unhappy to pick this card pretty early because I guess the only hero where you're maybe not super thrilled about it is Chain because you're hoping for Aether Ironweave. But I mean, if you don't get Aether Ironweave, you'll be very glad that you have Blood Drop Brocade. So it's still like not even that bad. And in all the other heroes, I think it's just actively good. So
Yeah, it might just be a best in slot for all the other ones, not including legendaries.
yeah, yeah, I think so.
Last type of equipment that's good would, I guess, pretty obviously Ironhide equipment. We talked about this as well in almost all the episodes. It's good here too. And I think the main part about Ironhide in Levia would be it actually turns your no blocks cards. If you have like a, let's say, a blue Dreadwood Rumbler, if you pitch that and you have multiple pieces of iron rods, like that's you turned your card into like a 4 block. Like it's kind of necessary if you're forced to play no blocks in your deck.
That's a really good point. Another card that can kind of do this is the Rally the Rear Guard. It's the generic 2 for 6, and you can discard a card when you defend with it to give it +3. You know, it's a 6 power. It's not super exciting or anything, but it can be a way to bail you out if you have a lot of those no blocks and you're kind of looking to do that. Maybe notably for like all of these equipment is that remember when you break your equipment, it goes to your discard pile. A lot of times people just flip it over, and in most decks that's fine. But for Levia, it actually needs to be in your discard pile because it is one of the cards that you can banish. So sometimes your decisions around equipment can also be based around putting more cards in your discard. You should be thinking about it at least. Like, do I want to put another card that is not a 6 power into my discard? Maybe yes, maybe no, but it's something to be aware of. It kind of depends on, like if you have a lot of 6s in there, maybe getting an extra card in there that you can hit and maintain your 6s is a good thing. And if you have a lot of no blocks in there, or sorry, a lot of non 6s in there, maybe you don't want to add more if you can avoid it.
Yeah, another just a rules thing. When you are playing in like let's say your nationals, You do need to sleeve your equipment in the same sleeves as your main board because they do go in the graveyard, and it does need to be random of how you choose the card. And technically, like even if you like flip it over, shuffle it up, and roll a dice for it, you still do need to have them all in the same sleeve, so no cards are marked.
Yeah. Anything else about equipment before we move on?
Stubby is bad. Time skippers kinda expensive. So yeah, I think those are all the equipments. Okay, let's move on and talk about just generic attack actions.
Yeah.
Kind of not sure what you wanted to talk about here. What is
We can just kind of talk about some of the attack actions that I think are good in the deck. So some of the, as a rule, if it has 6 power, you can probably put it in Levia and it's probably fine. Some of the ones I like in particular are the 1 costs. So Graveling Growl, which is a 1 for 7, and if you've banished a card with 6 or more power, you can play it. So you can only play it from your hand if you've banished one with 6 or more power, but it is a 1 for 7, which is really strong. And Boneyard Marauder is a 1 for 6, and as an additional cost, you banish 3 cards. Both of these are really nice with Dread Screamer because you can pitch a blue, play Dread Screamer, play this, and get like a 12 to 13 damage turn, which is just really, really good and something to keep an eye out for. So you don't want like only Graveling Gowls or only Boneyard Marauders in your deck, but having a few to pair with your Dread Screamers is really nice. I think Endless Maw, especially at red, is a premium one. This one gets, as an additional cost, you banish 3 cards and it gets +3. So it's a 3 for 9 effectively, just super efficient. You can play things like Zealous Belting, especially at red, as a way to get extra go again. So this is probably a little worse than your Dread Screamers, but it is like another way to get go again, and sometimes you just need that. Notably, if you do have Zealous Belting, you want to have yellow and blue 6 powers to pair with it. So pay attention to your yellow and blue 6 power account. If you have Zealous Belting, it is not it like you have opportunities to pick them up, but I think that you do need to pay attention to it. It's like if you're not thinking about it, you can wind up with a deck that just doesn't have that many ways to turn on Zealous Belting.
and it's kind of bad if you have to block with it because they're not 6 powers, so like banishing them doesn't really do anything either. It is a card where you have to be actively attacking with it with go again for it to be good.
Soul Harvest, Levia's specialization. How do you feel about Soul Harvest, Jay?
Soul Harvest is great. I love it. I like this card. It's just 6 power block 3. That's a blue strip. Like kinda the text inside the middle, other than that it says specialization, so you can't actually play 2 copies of it in your deck, even if you draft 2. I like it. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it.
Yeah.
Kinda hard to play though.
Yeah. It is very much a blue 3 block 6 power and not a whole lot else, but that's still real good.
Yeah, it just has like all the right numbers in the right places, and in the odd chance you get to play it, like you have like you're in your like first cycle at the very end of your pitch stack, you have like 4 blues, you draw up 4 blues, and your opponent blocked out the turn before it, and you just go, pitch 6 Soul Harvest for 12. That might just be like what you have to do if you can even get there, even if it's like Soul Harvest for 10. Kind of good.
Yeah, agree with all of that. I think notably this card is not nearly as good as Soul Reaping is for Chain. I don't think it's like, oh, I saw a Soul Harvest, so I need to like slam pick it and now I'm Levia. But if you are Levia, like you would very much like to have Soul Harvest in your deck. It's just like a solid glue piece, I think, is the best way to think of it.
Yeah. It's just like it's nice. It's nice to be able to have a blue card that has 6 power, blocks for 3. It's like I don't even know how to say it. It was like in Classic Constructed, there were people playing Titanium Baubles because it was a non-attack action, but it still blocked for 3. To play like Nourishing Emptiness. It's that kind of like idea of like this is just there as for the functions of the stats itself, not for the actual card.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I mean, I think those are the main cards that you're looking for in Levia. If you're really scraping for go again and your deck is like pretty bad, I think Brandish and Belittles are okay in small numbers as just like 1 cost go agains that you can fit in with a 7 power, or sorry, with like a 2 cost. Like so you can do like a 3 for 10 off them kind of thing. It's fine, but not exciting. Also, Red Captain's Call gives 2 cost or less go again, so it can be a way to go wide. But I don't think I'm like hoping to put Red Captain's Call in my deck. But like if you're, it's a card you can play and it does help you go wide.
Oh, talking about actually Red Captain's Call and brandishes, we kind of forgot to talk about the combat chain as Levia with Go again. So, because a lot of these cards, Levia's cards, require you to banish 3 cards from your graveyard to play them, you can, if you don't have enough cards in your graveyard, like let's say you have 2 cards after you play a Dread Screamer, you can close the chain intentionally with the action point still floating and move the Dread Screamer into the graveyard and then play your next card that banishes 3 cards. Vice versa, you can intentionally not close the chain to not banish like your Red Screamer that's a 6 power and banish other cards in your graveyard and try and keep that like not have a chance to banish the red screamers. This is something that you just have to be aware of just like throughout the game. And if you're playing cards like Belittle and Brandish, you might want to play the Brandish, close the chain, put it in your graveyard so you can banish the Brandish. So if you already have like a higher density of 6s and you don't want to banish too many 6s at the same time. This is just like a kind of a consideration and like probably a good level up moment in Levia if you are going to practice with her. Just be aware that these are ways to adjust the number of cards in your graveyard.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you can also take it the other direction where you can say, actually, I don't want to put this brandish in here because I already have a lot of misses and it's like kind of dangerous. So I'm gonna choose not to close the chain. So you can do either way if you want to, you know, preserve more 6s potentially or have less misses. You can do either one.
Cards like Red Captain's Calls, the moment you play them, they do technically go to the graveyard. So make sure they are part of like your cost. If you play like Red Captain's Call into a Boneyard Marauder, you have to put the Red Captain's Call in your graveyard first. It's there is no, you can't like keep it out of your graveyard in any way.
Yeah, that's a good point because sometimes people like to keep those cards out as like kind of like a visual reminder of the board state, but yeah, for the purposes of paying your cost and banishing cards from your discard, it is in your discard, and you have to put it there, or you are breaking the rules.
Let's move on to some of the Majestics we think are playable. I think first card on our list, this card is definitely strong. It's going to be Shadow Puppetry. This is a 0 cost. Your next attack gets go again and +1 on hit banish. On hit banish kind of not relevant, right?
It's not great. Yeah, you banish the top card of your deck, so well you can look at it and then choose to banish. So I mean, I guess it's like only upside. Like if you have the potential to like hit like a howl or a void wraith if it's in your deck, you can choose not to banish. If you need to banish a 6 power, you you can off the top. So like because it's optional and you get to look at the card before you decide, it's like only upside. But yeah, it's like it's mostly the +1 and go again that you're excited about in Levia.
Yeah, and this is like a good way to make your own Dread Screamer. You like end up like arsenaling the Shadow Puppetry, find a 5 card hand, and if you don't, let's say you just don't draw a Dread Screamer, then you play Shadow Puppetry and start going on with your other Levia Shadow Brute cards that attack for way too much. And it's a good way to just build your own Dread Screamer. That being said, do you think Shadow Puppetry is better than Dread Screamer?
Ooh, I don't really think so. I think Red Dread Screamer is still better.
Definitely, I'd pick Shadow Puppetry over Yellow Dress Streamers, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I think Red Dread Screamer being a block 3 and a 6 power is like pretty good. It's also just spending a whole card for +1 and an action point is like fine, but not. It's like the rate on it isn't that good, but because you're so starved on action points, you are happy to play this card. But like it's not that different from like a Lead the Charge, and Lead the Charge is like not a great card. So like yeah, I don't know. It is good because of like the context of like Levia and wanting extra action points, but like it is not a strong card on rate. So I think because of that, like I value the Dread Screamer as just like a very efficient card. Like Dread Screamer has go again and is very efficient. Whereas anytime you're spending like 3 cards and one of them is the Shadow Puppetry, like your turn's output like per card is just much worse.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me too. It's one of those cards where you kind of need kind of like Red Captain's Call. You kind of need if you are lacking in go again, but it's like if you have like six red screamers, you probably just don't even need to play Shadow Puppetry in your deck.
The thing is, like, you probably will never really get six red dread screamers, but so like because of that, this ends up being a good pick. But yeah, it's like kind of not a great card, even though I don't know.
Well, it's Flesh and Blood in general, right? Like all these, every card in the game is just like, oh yeah, this card is really good, but is it actually that much better than like a common in the game? And a lot of the time, the answer is like, no, it's not. And I
Yeah,
think the next couple of cards we're going to talk about is going to illustrate this. I kind of don't like this card. I don't know about you, Yuki, but I'm going to just talk about three cards right now. It's going to be Deep Rooted Evil, Shadow Blasphemophat, and Tear Limb from Limb. The problem with all of these cards that I have with it is that they all are non-blocks, and Deep Rooted Evil is yellow, Shadow is red, and Tear is blue. So they're all in different colors, so depending on what colors you need, it might be okay. But I kind of don't like these cards. What about you, Yuki?
yeah. I'm also not a huge fan of these. I think of them, Shadow of Blasphemophet is the most playable for me, and specifically, I don't mind it if you have specifically if you have Red Howl from Beyond. It's pretty good because it can let you tutor the Red Howl in the early game. But don't know if I would pull like I don't know if I would like choose to play this card if I didn't have a Red Howl from Beyond. It's just like a way that like doesn't start your blood debt that can start setting up your graveyard, which is kind of nice. And like people have sometimes played this card and constructed for that. It's just that like the Red Howl from Beyond is pretty hard to get because it's a rare and it's a high pick. So like Shadow of Blasphemophat's not a high pick, but if I had the Red Howl, I might consider playing this card is kind of how I would put it.
Yeah, I think a good illustration would be like, I think in our last couple of drafts, like Shadow Blasphemophat's been like wheeling around. Like a foil Shadow Blasphemophat got open and they're like wheeled around the table, and I was just like, oh, there's like three cards left in the pack. I see a Shadow Blasphemophat and it's a foil. It's a mythic. I guess I picked this over a common I can't play in my deck. Like it kind of gets to like that point of like kind of don't want it. We're probably looking for like a 3 block, a blue pitch, a 6 power that can block. Just like there's just like so many more cards that are better than this card that you just don't want it, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think if you are including it, you really want to have something good to be searching off of it. Don't just put it in your deck because it's a majestic, because it's just a 6 power with no go again, and it doesn't block. It's red. It's just not great. And the other ones, like, yeah, they pitch, but yeah, they're just not very good cards.
It's kind of funny that it's just a bad smash with Big Tree.
Yeah. Yeah, it is just kind of a bad smash with Big Tree. Like again, unless you're getting specifically Howl from Beyond. Like I think even like I don't even know that like Void Wraith or Ghostly Visit would be like enough to make me want to play this card. I don't think so.
Yeah, they don't have go again, so it's kind of hard to put it all together. Yeah, you don't really want to take too much. Like playing it to just a banish to like turn off your blood debt is kind of like not what you where you want to be. You want to be like banishing to get like benefits, not to just survive.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
I think the last majestic for Levia would be Mark of the Beast. I kind of hate this card because you can't count this card for your minimum 15/6 power because it will never go to your graveyard. Mark of the Beast reads, when this card would go to the graveyard, banish it instead. So if it's during your turn, if it goes to graveyard, let's say you attack with it, it'll immediately turn off all your blood debt for the turn. But let's say you block with this card and it gets banished. It doesn't actually turn off your blood deck because Levia doesn't care if you've banished on your opponent's turn. Do you find this card useful, Yuki?
It's fine. Yeah, it can be awkward. It's like okay. It's not the worst thing ever, but I don't think it's fantastic. I guess it turning off blood debt and being a 2 card hand is like okay, but like a 2 for 6 is really not exciting, and it's not really like doing anything that's like special or amazing. And it's just like kind of this weird card. And if you get in a position where you really want to block with it early, but you don't want to turn on your blood debt, it can be a bit of a liability. So like I'll put it this way. I think that yellow hungering slaughter beast, the yellow 2 for 6 that as additional cost you banish 3 cards, I think that card is just better by quite a bit.
Yeah, I kind of think that card is just strictly better too.
Yeah.
Like yellow hungering slaughter beast isn't a card that you're like aggressively looking for anyways, right?
Yeah, like if you have zealous beltings, you can pick up this card. It's like kind of a resource card that's a 6 power, so it's fine, and it blocks 3. So like it does like a lot of like okay things, but it's like it's not an exciting card, and I think this is worse than it. So at least within the context of draft, like I seen this card see some play in constructed, but you don't want this in draft.
Constructed is a completely different beast. It's just like you have way more health. There's like so many more turns you have to turn off blood debt that you might need cards like this. But in draft where you need to put the pressure on or you're gonna just like end up getting blown out because your life total is just a little bit too low. And if you open this card because your deck is a little bit smaller, this it can be a problem right away as well. So yeah, I would try and stay away from most of Levia's Majestics. And actually, we have a couple more Majestics to talk about. I think one more I forgot was Hexagore. Hexagore is also a Majestic. How good is this card, Yuki?
Don't play it. Just don't. Just play Medax. Just Hexagore real bad. You need 6 blood debt in your discard, and then I guess it comes in for 6, which is good. But 6 blood debt is a lot, and it doesn't turn off your blood debt. And the Medax is actually pretty good because it helps fill your graveyard for the early game. So like just play Medax. It is so much better than Hexagore. You might think you have a Hexagore deck, and I promise you that you don't. um
Okay.
that's kind of what I would say. Like maybe you just have a gigantic brain and you know something about the format that we don't know. If that's the case and you're like, this is the sick Hexagore deck, let us know in the comments. I would love to see it, but until somebody shows me that deck, I don't believe it. Yeah, it just has too many problems. It's yeah, don't do that to yourself.
Other than Majestics, any other card you should stay away from with Levia? Cards that seem good, but like maybe not good.
I think like a really good heuristic for you is just generics that aren't 6 power and don't have go again probably don't fit in the deck. So even a card like Red Surging Militia, which is like a pretty good card, isn't really a card I'm looking to put into my Levia deck because it blocks 2. It's not a 6 power in my discard. And in the late game, it doesn't turn off my blood debt, so I can't actually play it. And usually, the late games when you want to play it because they have to block it and you get the bonus power. So, like, it just kind of doesn't do what you want in this deck, even though it is like a good generic and you can play it in like every other deck. And in Levia, like, not to say like I couldn't put this card in my deck. Like maybe if I'm scraping for playables, I would put it in, but I'm hoping not to, is how I would say it. And I think that kind of follows through for basically any of the generics. If they don't have go again and help you go wide in some way or use your big hand and they're not 6 power, like you just don't want them. You don't want like a, what is that one? Adrenaline Rush.
Oh, Adrenaline Rush, yeah, no good in this one.
Yeah, like Adrenaline Rush, great card, but like, you just don't want this card in Levia.
Yeah, kind of bad, kind of bad. It's like you might play the blue one if you need blues, but that's about it.
Yeah, yeah,
I think a good way to think about it would be that Levia, almost all of Levia's cards, like class cards, are just like very powerful on their own. Like, 2 costs for 7, 2 costs for 6, and those, it's just generics don't, and they block for 3. Sorry. And Levia's cards also block for 3. And the generics just basically do very close to that, maybe a little bit worse, and they all block for 2. So there's like almost no reason to play any of these generics outside the fact that you might have to. And I kind of think a Levia deck that has to play generics might not be where you like you can't really afford to play them, right? Like, or your deck's just not good and you're gonna lose in like so many different ways, I think.
yeah. I mean, I think if you have a couple 6 power generics, it's fine. But yeah, certainly you don't want too many of them, and like even the 6 powers and the non sixes, you definitely don't want.
If you're forced to play like yellow pound for a pounds and stuff like that, I feel like you're just like in the wrong seat for Levia.
Yeah, it's it's pretty terrible. Like it just does nothing that you want. It's like a brick in your graveyard. It's a bad pitch card. It doesn't block three. Like just, you know, there's so many, yeah, there's just so many brute block threes that aren't six powers that are like, why would you pick this yellow pound for a pound?
Did you want to talk about the game plan against each hero, or do you think there is any differences between playing against each different hero?
I don't know if there's like too many differences. I think in general, Levia is like a very mid-rangey deck where you're trying to play a value plan. I guess just be aware of when you turn on your blood debt. You can maybe block out chain if you have a lot of three blocks, but it's like a bit sketchy if they have a good blood debt deck. So, or sorry, if they have a good chain deck. So you probably want to be trying to like play efficient two card hands and like kind of present threats and also block a little bit, rather than pure fatigue. But you do kind of need to make a decision about that because once you start banishing, you can't switch back to fatigue. So that's like a real consideration there. I guess against Prism, I think I think a lot of people's like day one observation is like, oh, Levy is insane against Prism because you have all these poppers, and you do, but you need to play them. Like you need to be playing your cards to turn off your blood debt. And if she gets a spectral shield, that that is just like a recursive weapon that she can keep using for forego again that you can't pop. So you do need to have ways to pressure her and kind of break those spectral shields. And I think that don't think because you have poppers you can just fatigue Prism. She'll probably fatigue you if you try to do that. You do need to be playing like a proactive game plan into her. So just kind of a bit of a heads up. The dominate is really good into Prism because it can clear all her shields and there's just nothing she can do about it. So or very little she can do about it. I guess she can blinding beam and stuff if it's a small attack.
Yeah, I kind of think that like in the Levia versus Prism matchup, it's more on like it's more work for the Prism player to do things, so you don't really have to think too hard. You just have to be like when they give you a Phantasm card, just look at your hand. If you have a popper, you should probably try and pop it. And if they don't, then you should just like play as you would against every other hero and just like hit them as hard as you can. If it's that kind of turn, or build your graveyard if it's that kind of turn.
I think that's really about it.
Yeah, against Bolton, you just do the same thing, right? You just hit as hard as you can and hope you don't miss your banishes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Levia is like, even though she has all the three blocks, really doesn't want to play this like fatigue. Like she's not a guardian, and don't make the mistake of thinking that she is. The blood debt being such like an on off thing, and once you're committed is a huge deal. And Medax taking a card out of your deck means you can't just sit there and block three and swing Medax because you'll fatigue yourself first. So you really do need to be playing into that game plan that we talked about of building up your graveyard and then go again and dominate to close out the game. And you're kind of doing that into everybody. So just, yeah, keep that in mind, I guess.
Yeah, Levia's kind of the most simplest hero. It's just a little tricky to actually draft her because, as we said when we were talking about the deck outline, we'll just go back to it just a little bit. That you need at least 15 six powers, and that's not easy to just get without intention, right? Like you need to have intention during your draft to pick up six powers, to pick up the three block six powers, and to pick up the Dread Screamers, the Go Again, the Dominate. You need to have a lot of intention on all of your picks, and I feel like Levia kind of is like a simple hero, but I feel like she might be one of the hardest decks to do the draft portion properly. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think, I'm trying to think if there's like a good comparison here. Maybe like Dromai. Maybe Dromai is a bit of a comparison where like just because you have a bunch of Levia cards in your deck doesn't mean that you have a good Levia deck. You really need those specific pieces that we talked about. And so I think a bit of a trap when you're drafting Levia is just going, oh, I'm seeing, or like maybe not even a trap, but just like something to be aware of is when you're drafting Levia, if you're seeing a lot of Levia cards, it's not always a reason to get into the deck. Because if you don't have your Dread Screamers, you don't have your Hooves, you can really kind of wind up with this deck that doesn't really do much. And the mediocre Levia decks are just like pretty mopey. They're really not very good. You really do need to see those cards. So sometimes if you truly believe like, yes, I'm the only Levia and like maybe I'll see them later, like that's something that you can do, but you are taking a little bit of a risk on like needing to see those cards later. And usually I'm most comfortable getting into this deck for like specifically those Dread Screamers and those Who's. If I'm seeing some of those early, I'm like, okay, sure, I'll take these and I'll consider going Levia. But if I'm just seeing like Boneyard Marauder, Hungering Slaughter Beast, Dreadwood Rumbler, and there's like, brute commons in the pack, I'm just like, like I don't really want to get into Levia for any of these cards. What do you think, Jay?
It's kind of funny part is like when you are drafting Levia, don't see like the red Dread Screamers, but you see all of these other cards, and you start like maybe moving in, but then someone else might be also doing the same thing, and then you come into this like draft where like it started with like no Levia drafters, and then by pack two there's like two or three Levia drafters, and then now they're all like desperately looking for their like first red Dread Screamer, their Hooves the Shadow Beast, and then when that kind of thing happens, you're just like all doing really bad, and then gets like, and that's typically how like the one chain gets to like really pop off, or like the one Bolton really gets to pop off, the one Prism gets to pop off. So like you really have to be careful with Levia. Probably kind of like the only deck in the format where it really supports like the being the only guy, the only person in the only person in the draft pod drafting Levia. And then once you like hit like the third person to be drafting Levia, your deck's probably just like not good enough.
Yeah, I think three Levia pods are usually pretty sad. It very like it kind of reminds me of it sort of reminds me of Dromai where like you need all your red go agains and enough red density and all of your starters and like all that stuff to have a good Dromai deck. And if you don't, like just because you have a bunch of Dromai cards doesn't mean that your deck's functional. Levia might have less like bad cards. Like it feels like a lot of her cards are kind of like glue cards and are like solid. They block three and all of that. It's just that you need the right kind of like power pieces or you just can't really close the game.
Anything else you want to talk about Levia?
I don't think so. I think that pretty much wraps up everything for her that I have. I'll say that Levia is probably the hero that I'm the most reluctant to draft. That's not to say I won't draft it or I'm not comfortable, but just like I really want to be getting strong Levia cards and be getting into it because of those cards. And otherwise, I'm just not interested. And I'm willing to, like maybe it's open, maybe it's not. I'm really not interested in speculating, is kind of where I'm at with her. I know some players do like her and are a little more willing to take the risk on that than I am, but I've just, yeah, I don't know. I really don't want the mediocre Levia decks, and I think the other thing I don't like about this hero is sometimes even when you get the nuts Levia deck, I've had the experience where like all your Dread Screamers are in the bottom of your deck, and then you still just like kind of can't win the game. Like you just like miss, you get like very unfortunate banishes and you lose to your Blood Dead. Like it just feels like the deck has a little more variance in it than the other heroes in the format, so that even when you have the really good one, you're like not as likely to 3-0 as some of the other heroes, or at least that's how I felt with the hero. I don't know about you.
Yeah, kind of same. It does feel like when you are facing a Levia and they like have a good Levia deck, it kind of feels unwinnable sometimes because they keep on like putting more sixes in and they keep on banishing a six. They put on they and then like there are just games where you're like, oh, how would I have ever won this game? And the answer was like never. You just can never win against Levia. Except for the fact that if they just drew like a hand in the wrong order, they could have just taken like 7 or 8 blood dead and then the game was yours. So it's kind of weird of like highest variance, and I think it balances out that it has like that high end of variance of like, oh, this deck's kind of nuts, and the low
Mm-hmm.
end of variance of like, you just like I didn't do anything but you still lost, right? Like that kind of game still happens.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've definitely been on both ends of those where I'm just like, yep, this sure wasn't a game. I just got rolled, and also just like, wow, I had no business winning this game. My deck was way worse than yours, but you missed Blood Dead at the end and you took 8, and sometimes that's good enough.
Yeah, I think my favorite story with Levia is like, oh, I did like 2 damage to Levia and she died. It's just like, oh, 2 missed turns, 10 blood dip per turn. Oops.
Yeah, it's unfortunately pretty real. Something that can happen with this deck. And it's not to say that the deck isn't good. Like I don't think that the deck is bad. It's just kind of high variance. That's all.
Okay, you wanna just wrap it up then?
So that's going to wrap us up for this week. Let us know in the comments below your thoughts on Levia. Is there anything we're missing? Is there a secret archetype that we don't know about, or cards that you really like in the deck that we didn't talk about? We'd love to hear about that down in the comments below. If you want to get in touch with us, you can, of course, comment, but you can also reach out to us on Twitter. Jay is at UedaJ, and I'm at Yukili Bender, or you can email us directly at onthebauble@gmail.com and send us your question or feedback directly there. Um, until next time, hope you have fun drafting Monarch and getting ready for your upcoming calling or nationals, or whatever your next major event is. Maybe skirmish. We have skirmish around the corner. So yeah, have a good evening.
For the sign off, I just have a question. Have you decided what hero to play for Calling Vegas? I know this is gonna be kind of weird because I think this episode is gonna come out probably sometime next week for us, like sometime in August. And the calling, at least when we air this, will be kind of close to it, right? Like it's gonna be like is it the 19th or the 26th?
26th. It's like a month
26th.
away from when we're recording, maybe like 3 weeks away from when we
Actually, air
go into things. Actually, yeah.
is
Um, Nope, sure don't. I have no idea what I'm going to play, honestly. I shouldn't say no idea. I think that the most likely decks for me to play are Lexi, Icelander, or maybe I pick up Dromai and learn her. She does seem pretty good. She's been doing very well. Maybe I believe in that deck. There's some things I don't love about Dromai, where like I feel like the red line, like Mara's version, like the red line play lots of attack actions deck is like really good in the mirror and good in some spots, but then like also just kind of like if Lexi has a bunch of ice quakes, you just don't get to play the game, and it doesn't really have a fantastic guardian matchup. And then if you play the big dragon matchup, you get like rolled in the mirror. So like I don't love that aspect of Dromai, so I don't know if I will bring it, but I do think she's good. And then I could also see myself playing. I think because like Lexi and Icelander are such comfort picks, I'm kind of just waiting for the calling Birmingham to see what happens, and just continuing to explore options. And I feel like I can get into form with either of those decks, pretty quickly if need be. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I haven't really locked anything in. I'm sort of just waiting to see calling results.
That's super fair. That's super fair. Yeah, I think I kind of need to start playtesting a little bit too. I'm with War. What is it called? Warmonger's Diplomacy.
Yeah.
That card is actually making me quite scared to play Lexi. Um, it's I'm not gonna have like the experience to play against that card with Lexi too much. So then I don't know. I'm not confident in my skills to be able to play around that card as Lexi. So I might try someone else. Currently, I'm thinking about playing Dash. Not because she's good, but because I have a lot of high octanes and what's the other card called? High octanes and Teklo Foundry. No, Teklo cores. So I mean, if I have like 10 copies of each of those cards, if I just play it and hopefully a top eight, maybe I can make those cards go up in price.
There you have it. This is the way that you select your deck.
Yeah, if I have too
You
many
just pick the
copies
card
of
that you're sitting on.
yeah, and then if you win with it and then convince everyone else to play the deck, then we can get that card to go up in price, and then I can finally move some of these cards.
That that maybe, but also I don't see myself playing Dash.
Think about it. Like Teklo Core is basically Black Lotus. Card's great.
You could say that blues are like Black Lotus too, though. You could say titanium baubles like Black Lotus. And it blocks 3, Black Lotus with upside.
I yeah, yeah, sure. No, 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 no. I need to sell this card. I need to sell this card. Teklo core, Teklo core. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
I
okay.
mean,
Real card that's
to be
good in
fair,
dash.
yeah,
Yeah, real card that's good in dash is Pulse Wave Harpoon. Okay, this card's actually pretty good.
Teclocore is also really good. Like with Spark specifically, like when you use Spark of Genius Teclocore, pretty insane. And High Octane's really good. Like the weird thing about Dash is she just has like no cards in her card pool, and yet she somehow just like still top eights events or wins them when nobody's expecting her to, and everybody's like, yep, Dash still isn't that good, and she like still does okay. So like I don't think Dash is like a terrible deck ever, and she has like some very strong things. It's just doesn't feel like she does quite enough either. I don't
Look,
know.
her best cards are 0 to 60, Zipper Hit, and Throttle. Like, how basic can that get, you know? Like, every deck
Yeah.
plays 6 0 to 60, 6 Zipper Hit, 6 Throttle. Like, oh, actually, it plays 9 0 to 60. Most decks play 9 0 to 60. It's so crazy that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna look into Dash quite a bit and see what kind of Dash I want to play. I feel like Dash is one of those decks where like you always win by 1 life kind of thing, so you can't really make any mistakes with her. And she still just has that random high roll opportunity. So, and it kind of doesn't really have a bad matchup right now. Like I can't really think of a bad matchup. Like you don't really want to play against like Jeromai with like too many Kylorias or a one that's like
I
kind
think
of checked
I
against you.
from what I understand, Dromai is pretty miserable for you, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
like I
not
kind of don't
not
want
an
to see
expert in
Dromai
either.
across from me, but other than that, like everyone else is like it's fine. Like you all your cards block for 3 and you have
But like
cards.
Dromai is one of the best decks in the format right now.
Yeah, just outplay them. I don't know. Just do something.
Okay, okay. Here you
I
have it, folks. Jay's gonna take down the calling with Dash. I mean, I don't think it's a terrible choice. I think it's pretty reasonable. So
yeah, kind of I'm kind of excited to start working on her. Maybe I find something. Maybe I figure something out with her, and
yeah,
we'll
you can
see.
replace one of her boost cards with another boost card.
Wow, she doesn't have any other boost cards. Her list is basically stock. She hasn't changed since since T Bone came out. You know, that's a big upgrade.
Yeah, T-Bone, Pulse Wave, Teclo Pounder. That's
Okay,
about it.
yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about. Just maybe some ideas on CC. I think that will wrap up this week's episode then. Hey, good night, everyone.
Thanks for listening.